I grew up in a loving home, so I never thought abuse could happen to me. It started subtle, control disguised as care, until one moment made me realize my life was actually in danger. And even after leaving, the hardest part was still ahead.
Whether you're seeking true stories, real-life Christian testimonies, uplifting moments, or just a little bit of hope, you can find it here. This is Kingdom Chronicles. What if the thing that you thought could never happen to you slowly became your reality? What if you grew up in a loving home with parents who respected each other, believing that abuse was something that only happened to other people? And what if the person hurting you didn't look dangerous at first? What if they made you feel chosen, important, safe? Until slowly, the people who loved you most began disappearing from your life. Well, for one young woman, this wasn't her fear. It actually became her reality. This is Skylar's testimony.
I grew up in a Christian home with parents who loved and respected each other. Abuse wasn't something I had ever seen up close. Because of that, I never imagined it could happen to me. I remember thinking, for people who come from good, stable households, how could you ever end up in abuse? It felt like something that happened to other people, not to me. When I was 19, I entered into a relationship with a man from work who was 8 years older than me. Right from the beginning, there was a power dynamic that I didn't even recognize. It started as a genuine friendship, and slowly, over time, I began to rely on his approval. He flattered me. He made me feel important. He made me feel chosen. And when someone older seems to value you like that, you want to be around them. Even when I learned he was involved with other women, he always reassured me that I was the most important person in his life. But we never went public with our relationship. He didn't act like I was his partner or his girlfriend, and that went on for years. At the time, I didn't see it as manipulation. He had an explanation for everything. He always wanted to know where I was, but because he wasn't controlling what I wore or where I worked, I didn't see it for what it was. It sounded caring. It sounded endearing. I thought, he cares about my day. He cares about where I'm going. He cares about who I'm with. Over time, that concern turned into control. Eventually, he drove a wedge between me and my best friend. He didn't even allow us to speak. I had to cut off that friendship, and it was absolutely devastating. I became more and more isolated. That's when I decided to see a counselor. She recommended a book about narcissism, and once I started to see it, I couldn't unsee it. I began paying attention to the patterns in our conversations. I started recognizing what was really happening. I confided in my pastor and showed him the texts and emails. He looked at me and said, "This is abuse." Not long after that, things turned physical. First, he grabbed my arm. Then I was shoved against a wall. Eventually, he held me by my neck against the wall. That was the moment I realized, this person could kill me. Every time we broke up, he came back with promises. He made me feel important again. I believed it would get better. It never did. I was stuck in a cycle. My counselor explained to me that it's like a drug addiction. Your body goes through chemical highs and lows over and over again. You become addicted to the high, and when the low hits, you'll do anything to make it stop. There are 4 phases to the abuse cycle: tension, incident, reconciliation, and calm, the honeymoon phase. I went through that cycle 10 times over multiple years. I couldn't see the manipulation. I couldn't see the power imbalance. But God placed people in my life at exactly the right time to help me see the truth. When I finally left, I surrounded myself with people who loved me and walked with me, including the best friend I had been forced to cut off. Telling the truth to people I trusted brought freedom. And once I tasted that freedom, I wanted more of it. Even after leaving, I carried deep grief. I had invested years into a future that was never real. I had to grieve the life I thought I was going to have. Healing didn't happen overnight. Therapy mattered. The work mattered. But more than anything, leaving that relationship transformed my relationship with Jesus. It changed how I saw his compassion. It changed how I understood his anger toward injustice. It changed how I saw his justice. I came to believe deeply that Jesus was angry that I was treated that way, and that he died to set me free. Once you've been through something like this, you don't read the Bible the same way. And the more I read it, the more I saw that he truly is who he says he is. When he says he's a healer, he can do it.
You know, one of the things that really stayed with me about Skylar's story was actually how normal it sounded in the beginning. She came from a loving home. She had good parents. She was living a life that most people would think was perfect, or, you would expect no problems from. And honestly, that's part of the story that makes it so important. Because what she ended up describing, it didn't start with that obvious fear. It started with attention, with someone who slowly became the loudest voice in her life, while the people who genuinely loved her were pushed further and further away. Now, the part about losing her best friend stood out, and so did her honesty about the cycle of leaving and going back. And I think that on the outside, most people sometimes wonder, how on earth did she end up going back? But hearing her describe it like an addiction, the emotional highs, the lows, the promises, I think that just helps us understand how complicated these situations really can be. And honestly, one of the heaviest parts for me was hearing her talk about grieving the future that she thought that she was going to have. Healing isn't just about leaving something painful behind. Sometimes it's grieving what you hoped it would become. I also really appreciated what she said about Jesus, and not in a cliche way, but in the way that this experience changed how she understood him. The idea that she thought that Jesus would be angry at the way that she was treated, and he cares about justice, compassion, healing. I thought that was really interesting, and maybe that's something that someone watching this might need to hear today. If you've been hurt, manipulated, broken down, Jesus doesn't look at that indifferently. He sees it, he cares, and healing, even if it takes time, is always possible. If Skylar's testimony meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. And if you know someone who may need to hear this story, please consider sharing it with them, and thanks for watching. See you in the next one.